Wavelength, the mental health podcast designed for digital natives and those who are perplexed by them. In each episode, we explore themes, trends, and innovations, and all other things shaping how today's tech-immersed generations care for their mental health. I'm your host, Dr. Sarah Adler, clinical psychologist, Stanford professor, and entrepreneur. And our guest for today is Kat Nameth, founding team member of Wave and clinical research scientist at Stanford School of Medicine. All right, Kat, let's do it.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. So Kat is, in full disclosure, the second one of our guests who I know very, very well. So Kat, what we've decided to do is start off every podcast with two truths and a lie. So, we do this at Wave all the time, but I feel like both you and our first guest were slightly disadvantaged because we've known each other for such a long time. So feel free to try to stump me and go for it. So go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm a little worried because I think you know probably everything about me, but okay, let's do this. I was born with an extra vertebrae. I once skateboarded off of the roof of my garage with minimal injury, and I was originally supposed to have a twin that I consumed in the womb.
Let's see. I think the last is a lie, right? You didn't consume your twin. Right. Yes. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. My brother consumed his twin in the womb. Sorry, Matthew, for putting you on blast, but that is what happened. I thought maybe because I didn't get injured skating off the roof, that could maybe throw you off, since it's very rare that I do something without injury, but.
Well, with minimal injury, right? Like that's the rare part. That's what almost caught me. I was thinking to myself, what do I know about Kat? The first one rolled off your tongue way too fast for it to actually be a lie. The second one, the minimal injury. If it had been no injury, I would have been like, that's the lie. Kat, you are very accident prone. But then the third one is just something I think I would have heard before. So yeah, that was my thought process. Okay. So the reason I was really excited to talk to you today is because, as you know, we are really focused on digital natives in the workplace. And you are a digital native in the workplace.
Yeah.
And you also have kind of the unique opportunity to function in multiple roles across your career, which is something actually that is pretty common with digital natives in the workplace as well. So we can talk about that. But you also have the unique experience of being both a manager and a managee in your multiple roles. You have different levels of autonomy. You have different levels of responsibility. And I thought that could be a really interesting thing to talk about, especially as it pertains to your mental health, if you're comfortable going there.
I would love to talk about this, especially because I think, we've all seen so many of the headlines coming out of like Gen Z doesn't want to work, or Gen Z is disrupting the workplace, or like don't hire Gen Z. It's so hard to work with this generation. And I think it is interesting because I feel like a lot of maybe what gets conflated in thinking about Gen Z in the workplace is wanting flexibility and autonomy versus wanting to be lazy or not work as hard. Because like a lot of the folks, including myself, who have these multiple roles, who do really kind of value that flexibility, what's really important is knowing that I don't care, if I have to work until 10 p.m. one evening, if it means that I don't start my day until 11 a.m. And that goes against the 9 to 5 structure that a lot of folks work within. And I think sometimes people feel like, oh, no, this is a way, to avoid, when really it's like, I mentally truly am in a better and clearer, productive place, like later in the day.
So that's really interesting. And I'm obsessed with this topic. Part of what we do at Wave is to help employers bridge what I call the generation gap in terms of dealing with their employees, which causes a lot of conflict. You may have seen Jodie Foster was just quoted after the Golden Globes for like complaining about how Gen Z is so annoying. I just commented on this. Anytime I hear someone talk about how annoyed they are as a clinical psychologist, I invite them to check in curiously about what is that bringing up for them and why they're annoyed. And I'm kind of wondering from your perspective, why do you think the older folk in the world are annoyed by your desire to have not your collective desire to have more flexibility?
No, but I think it's a good question. I think a lot of it comes from kind of the traditional belief of this is just the way it is and this is how it's always been. And, we had no problem just doing the standard 9 to 5. That's just what you did. And if you had to do something you didn't want to do, that's just how you operated. And it's kind of in the same narrative of like, you go and you buy a house, and like Gen Zs are kind of like not about that. And so I think it's hard to reconcile. Like, I, as an older generation, never felt that I could question this because this is just what we did and this was what it was expected of me. And so I think it feels really surprising to hear pushback on something that has been so commonly a part of American work culture is the standard kind of, 9 to 5, 40 hours a week. You do what you're asked and then you're done.
So I think that's really interesting in that you bring up the house topic as well, because my hypothesis on this, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, is that buying a house isn't viable for y'all. And so when you are thinking about why motivationally you're showing up for work each day, it isn't moving towards some longer term symbol of what the American dream was. You're kind of like, hey, screw this. I can't buy a house anyway. So I'm not going to wrap up my entire identity associated with this value that's unattainable. So
I love what you just mentioned about that because I think it's totally right. Is one, like, because, again, there's also a lot, and you'd mentioned of holding multiple jobs. And I think what's different is for many folks these days, that is kind of a necessity. Even if your dream isn't obtaining a house, which for many, I would agree, it's very unlikely. I don't have any friends, within 5 years of me that own property. And so I think its work has now become something that is truly in service of like what your professional goals, what you're passionate about, what you care about, and less as working towards, again, this symbol of, we have the white picket fence and my 2 kids and my husband, and like, this is the American dream. That's really not what we're moving towards. It's how can I make the impact that I want to make and do the things that I want to do in a way that's productive and, supportive of my goals and also the needs of the community.
so that actually just I am super curious about that. How do you think um hold the identities that younger folks hold influences that thought paradigm?
Yeah. And I mean, I think given, I feel the disruption of almost all traditional narrative has really, really opened up the space for people to be, more openly expressive in their queer identities, in what they, again, view as the family, what they view as their immediate family, what relationships look like to them, what success looks like, and what opportunities are actually meaningful. I think has become a lot different because, again, like, nobody's really wanting to just settle down and get married. Everybody wants to be that person. There's kind of like this allure of like, I'm working until 10 p.m. doing all this like cool techie stuff, and then I get to go travel because I don't actually have an office. Like, there's this very like fast paced, like non-traditional lifestyle that has really, really taken a hold. And I think the pandemic only exacerbated that. And it's live fast, do as much as you can, because I think a lot of these assurances that older generations had regarding social security, retirement, don't necessarily exist for us.
Okay, so that brings me back to something you said earlier, which was if you are gonna, you're totally happy to stay up until 10 o'clock at night and work whatever, as long as you can start the next day at 11. And what I think is really fascinating about that is that older millennials would be like, what? No, you have to still show up and be at your desk at 8:30, even if you, or for example, when I worked as a hedge fund analyst, like time was not, I was not an owner of my own time. If my boss, if my portfolio manager called me at 3 a.m. because something was happening in China, it was my job to answer that phone call and to be there. And I know in more traditional professions, like the legal profession, consulting profession, that the identity is that you are on call all the time. So I'm curious about what you think, why you think Gen Z has sort of moved away from that, or the younger digital natives.
Yeah, it is a good point and a great question too around like, you know, what would be expected and what is typical. Because you also have to think if you're the only person starting your day at 11 a.m., other people have already started their day, earlier and are working already. But I think that Gen Z is really, and I think this kind of goes hand in hand with the like mental health boom, the identity boom, is this reclamation of what boundaries mean and what our time truly means to us. And I think that there used to be a bit more of a feeling of being indebted to an employer. For example, my dad was with a company that he was unhappy with for almost 20 years just because he had been there forever. And that, like that's just what he did. And he felt like he owed it to the company to continue giving them his time, even if he felt he wasn't necessarily moving towards his goals or it was feeling less and less like a good fit for him. Whereas I think Gen Z has way less patience for that. It's if it's not working, if I'm not feeling the level of like validation and in respect in this space, then to me, why would I offer my time at the expense of my own mental health?
Okay, so why do you think that is? Why was your dad, who's Gen X, right? He's
I
fully
think
in the Gen X spectrum. Yeah. And why would he be totally okay with working a job? Why does he have company loyalty? Why is he with something that you've already identified is not values congruent for him? Whereas you are saying, hey, I am 20 something years old and I demand respect now in the workplace. I demand validation now. What has happened in the world, do you think? What do you think is different about the digital natives? Maybe it's that they're digital natives that is adding to this.
I think the digital aspect is huge. Having a community that is easily accessible to you, even through TikTok, for example, you see so many TikToks of like how to like passively stick it to your boss. And like, like it's it's truly like become a cultural thing that everyone's kind of buying into. And the reason as to why I think there's a few things, I think in the past.
Wait, really quickly, sorry to interrupt you. So what you're saying is you think that the dreaded algorithm, which actually is feeding us information that is engaging, that we want to see, and that is clustered, is showing us these really entertaining versions of it's validating to us. The algorithm is actually working. It's validating something that's meaningful, and then it's creating a community around it. So it's even more validating. Sorry, I didn't mean
Absolutely.
to interrupt you. Okay.
No, no worries at all. No, and I absolutely think that that is what's happening is you're getting really, really like empowered by this sense of, yeah, you're right. My time is my time. And like, I don't need to earn anything. It should be given. Because, I remember always hearing similarly from my parents, respect isn't given, it's earned. And I think the kind of flip that is now happening is respect and trust in these things should be given until they're lost right at the start. And I
Interesting.
think that that's different. And I think that that speaks to the loyalty piece too, because it's like on a similar sense, like if the company isn't feeling loyal to me, then there would be no reason to reciprocate that relationship. And I think because of the access to information and just knowing that there usually is another opportunity or the next thing, and with startup culture, the fear of not finding employment isn't as great. Whereas for my dad, I think, he couldn't just go on Google and be like, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, what should I do? To him, it was, I have a family. Like, me being unhappy professionally isn't worth the risk of instability
Or disrupting the American dream.
or disrupting the American dream. And I think we're okay with having some instability if it
Interesting.
means that we're feeling respected, valued, and that we're doing something that actually like matters to us.
So I'm I'm both. I love this idea, and I'm also feeling so. You and I have worked together for how many years?
It will be almost 8.
And we've worked together for almost 8 years. Kat, I was Kat's first boss out of college, right? And you've
Yes.
worked with me across three different
Four.
three different workplaces. Four?
There
Oh my
was
gosh! Yeah, we forgot. Yeah, four. Yeah, that one I blocked out entirely.
4.
We worked together across four different institutions, companies, etc. And you have stayed with me that entire time. And so it's interesting because you're sort of also saying to me, on one hand, well, I guess that means you feel respected and validated, or at least you feel like there's something values congruent in our relationship. So I'm really happy about that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean, and I think, as you know, we've always had like a very open line of communication. Like, for example, 8 a.m. meeting, if you're going to schedule it, the likelihood that that's going to be like a good time for me is 0. And we've been able to, work towards kind of meeting in the middle in many ways. And I think that the space being given to do that is really important, and what a lot of folks don't always have. And so it's causing, these like great resignations and these huge waves, because most people aren't fortunate to have a boss say, yeah, sure, do that, like, as long as you get your work done.
Yeah, I think, although I will say it sounded like I was patting myself. I was like, "Oh, I'm the world's best boss. That's why I've been
No,
able to
no.
garner loyalty." I think, what's been really fascinating is the evolution of our relationship, and
Absolutely.
how we have sort of transcended probably like the depths of bad management on my part to the depths of, I think, where we are now, which is where we're in a much sort of healthier professional place. Part of that is that we've known each other for 8 years, and we also have a personal relationship, so it's very, very tricky. But I'm sort of curious about, I mean, so I'm actually very grateful for you for sticking with me despite my own growth edges of being a manager.
And I mean, I can say the same, because as you mentioned, this was my first job out of college. I like truly did not know what to expect. I did not know at that time necessarily like the path was going to take me. And I agree. I feel like I've seen kind of all of the stages of like professional development in our time working together, which has been really cool to see. And that's where I wish that other folks, and especially managers working with Gen Zs, have the opportunity to create that collaborative space of like, it's not that I don't want to work or I don't want to work hard. And at the same time, I have X needs that are also of importance to me. So like, how can we, work to make this an effective working relationship for us both? And I feel like that is another stark difference, is thinking back to, you had the husband would come home from work, drink his beer or do whatever. And that's, again, just what you did. And that was the end of the day kind of process. And I think for us, it's like, I don't want to end my workday feeling like, okay, I'm going to go sit in front of the TV with like a 6-pack, or, I need my glass of wine every night. Like, I want to go to work and I want to feel really good about what I'm doing there. And I don't want to feel like I am at all implicating my like mental health or my mental wellness for something that isn't serving me. And I think that that's kind of a new shift. And I think especially with how open folks are about mental health now.
And serving you, when you say serving me, you mean serving you beyond a paycheck.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's the other thing too that I think is a little different. It's not just about, the money. Of course, money is needed, but it's also about, if I don't feel like I'm making a contribution, if I don't feel like I'm growing, if I don't feel like I'm in a place where I'm getting that respect back, then I'm going to find that paycheck somewhere else.
So let's talk about that though, because I know you and I have actually had fairly difficult times in our working relationship where I think I've given I've been too much of a psychologist. I've been, and not a good manager. I think where we started was probably, I mean, before I had any real managerial experience, I was way too accommodating. I didn't set enough boundaries or expectations around this is what I need done, or this is what, and I'm curious about, because it sounds very clear that what you're saying is that folks need to feel respected, seen, validated in the workplace, and they need some accommodation, but can that go too far?
Oh, absolutely. And that is where I think, I think with anything, there's always folks that kind of want to push the needle on that. And that's where kind of do start to tend to disagree with some of Gen Z's kind of views in the workplace, because I think for me, what was really hard later on, due to that accommodation, was recognizing that that accommodation actually isn't always necessarily helpful for anyone, including myself. And also that you can't expect that in other places, so can set folks up to be very surprised when they're in a work environment that isn't accommodating. And so that is where I think a compromise has to be made, because I absolutely think it would be insane to suggest an employer should accommodate every single request somebody would have professionally, in service of their mental health. I think that it's reasonable that there's always going to be goals and things that need to be hit. And that's where I find it, we're in a really tough place of like, how do we figure out what flexibility is flexible enough that feels good without, going too far to a point now where things just aren't happening in the way they should be. And I think that is a very real concern.
So I have a question. This is a little wonky, but is there, so we sort of have hypothesized that digital natives are not as tied to the traditional paycheck. Um, is there an amount of money, and I'm going to ask you to name it, where you would take a job that was not giving you those things? Is there some amount of money in the world? And what I'm trying to sort of get at is it just that money doesn't go as far as it used to? Is it a real, what is that tension there? So I'm just curious, is there an amount of money? And I'm not saying that you would go work for a puppy mill or big tobacco, but what amount of money would lead you to take a job that wasn't values congruent, wasn't focused on your passion, which is mental health? How much money would that take?
That's such an interesting question, because like I always think, for example, how much money would I need to like get to not work again? And the answer is there's no amount, because I can't imagine a life where I'm not being productive in that way.
Right.
But quick clarifier. Is there room in this role for me to grow and develop over time, or am I kind of like in a stagnant position?
Um, Grow in what way?
Like, could I start at the middle and then make it to the top of whatever this less values congruent company is and then change it?
Oh, so you're making an assumption that being at the top would be better.
Because then what I didn't like that felt values incongruent, I could try and push down.
So let
So
let me clarify it this way. How much money, and your dad's not going to be listening to this, I'm guessing, but how much money do you think would you need to take your dad to live your dad's career?
um, like I'm not kidding, probably like $100 million just so I could use that to do something else.
Okay.
Like,
There's no amount of money that you would,
the
there's no
misery,
paycheck big enough to work in to do what your dad did.
no, the misery and the just day to day, like, boringness, no offense if you ever do watch this, Dad, of what he seems to do would be way worse than me not having to worry about finances.
Okay. And so that in itself is worth the uncertainty or the of working three jobs in your field of passion. Yeah.
Yeah, and I
Interesting.
think, I think we also like to keep things a bit more interesting, I think, in ways too, which is different. A lot of Gen Z's taking on other roles, even when financial isn't the motivation, is I think like there's a huge push away from monotony. And, I don't want to just do the same thing here all the time. So I can do something else here that kind of offsets maybe me not doing 100% or having 100% autonomy in these other kind of roles. At least I can do it here.
Do you think, okay, Rodney, do you know, can you look up for us what percentage of Gen Z has a side hustle or has more than one job, or what percentage of digital natives? I'm curious, why do you think that is though, Kat? Why do you think that this fundamentally is a generational difference? I mean, it's not for me, right? You know me with my ADHD. I want to have lots of different things going on at the same time, but I don't, most of my generation is not like that. They can actually manage to be satisfied or hold down with one job. Why do you think, what is endemically different about digital natives?
It's a great question because I do think one is, again, not wanting to get stuck in the same like day to day. But I think, again, similarly with this internet culture, like the side hustle, you see everyone they have their like job and then they're like, but this is my other job. Like I'm selling these products or like I have like an Etsy shop or like I do this. And it feels like a way of success to like manage kind of these different income streams and like, oh, this way, if something happens here, then like I still have this. There's a lot of
So that resonates deeply with me because I think a lot of why I like to do lots of things is because I like the stimulus and because I like to learn, but it also is a hedge, right? It's like, well, I like to do high risk things. So if this doesn't work out, I still have this or that. Okay, Rodney says that a segmentation survey of over 1,500 young adults ages 16 to 26 found 56% of Gen Z earned money from side hustles or freelance work, while nearly 2/3 were employed last year in a part-time or full-time role. Okay. So it's interesting. My theory, you can tell me, and I think we're probably getting towards time, but my theory on this also, and I wonder how you will respond, is that by definition, digital natives have been um, using screens, using digital incorporated into their lives kind of much, much earlier than the rest of us. And there are a lot of hypotheses out there. Elias Abujadi, one of our colleagues at Stanford, talks about this, right? Of that the brain structurally changes when you are interacting with the digital world at a much earlier age. What do you make of that? What do you think? And so the wanting the different stimuli, right, the different may actually be structural.
I would absolutely believe that that would make total sense because I do think this lack of stimulation is really what it like comes down to is I think because again we're always receiving information, we're always sharing information, like there's not a second in my day where I feel like I'm not looking something up or like just learning about something random. And so I do think we get bored very easily, and I think that it the feeling that you have to be productive kind of in some way kind of all the time is definitely a very real thing. Like for me when I don't have something to do at work I feel like something's wrong, like I'm like there has to be something I need to be doing, like it doesn't
Yeah.
seem right.
I mean, it's the levels of anxiety in your age group are exponentially higher than in any other demographic. And yeah, and you'll mitigate that any way you can. Okay,
Avoidance I think,
last
yeah.
question on this is if you had to give advice to like three main pieces of advice to Gen X or older millennial managers in terms of managing younger folk, what would the three pieces of advice be?
I think the first piece of advice would be, now I can't speak for everybody, but in most cases, approach I would shift the mindset that it's not that Gen Z don't want to work and that they're lazy. I would say they're the opposite. It's that Gen Z don't want to work within traditional confines. And so I think when approaching conversations with your employees, just remembering like this isn't really, I mean, of course it might be for some, but it usually isn't an issue of avoiding work. It's wanting to work in a different way. Um, and so I would try to kind of scrap that mindset because I do think it just creates a space where, there's a lot of reactivity and feeling unseen, all of that. The other thing that I would think about is to be really intentional in thinking about how time is used with your team and employees. I think this idea of meetings could have been an email is a real thing that makes the meetings that do need to happen less engaging, feel less important when you're over inundated with a bunch of update meetings. So I would definitely be mindful of how time is allocated and used and just thinking about that. Um, and then just to know that mental health is a really real thing that this generation cares a lot about. And taking days just because mentally you're not having a great day, I think is going to be something that's a lot more common. And to just approach it with empathy and understanding that we're in a world where a lot of things are changing very rapidly and we have a lot of information being given to us unfiltered kind of constantly, and that this kind of reclamation of being open about your mental health I think is really more of a net positive. And so to just be open and not deterring folks from giving themselves the space when they need it, to a point, of course.
Okay, and I'm going to add one more because I cannot help myself, but I think that it keeps us again, it keeps that balance in intact. I also am seeing this trend towards managers moving too much into the psychological realm, right? As being overdoing all of those things, being too accommodating,
Totally.
being too boundaryless around issues or with mental health. And I think that having very clear or even relying to your third point, even relying too much on asynchronous communication and not having that face to face to create empathy and human connection. So I do think
Yep.
it is a balance because I think um, we have to have we have to have boundaries around our personal space and our professional space. And a good manager cannot be a therapist. I think
No,
that face to face, even if it's on Zoom check ins, is crucially important to remind yourself that there is a human being on the other end. And I would also say that setting very clear expectations and communication with your employees, again, this is just good management 101, is so fundamentally important. So not being over a comment, oh, when do you want to get that in, when can you get that in, by saying like the business needs this, and consistently driving the communication up to like, yes, this is you are a person, and you are a person who's as a part of this business, but this business also needs, like, the best thing I can do for you is to make sure the lights stay on so you have a paycheck. So
totally. And
maintaining both of those things.
that's where, and this will be kind of, because I know we're getting at time, but like that is where I totally agree that balance is important. But in thinking of, for example, let's say there's like a huge project that's coming up, in that communication of being able to say, listen, I know this project is high priority, this is when it's due, I have 15 meetings that I'm kind of only there as an FYI, would it be okay for me to pull back from those so that I can focus on this more important thing? I think it's just not, hey, I'm never going to come to these meetings again, but being just honest and understanding like there's timelines and there's things that aren't necessarily the best use of that time when we're working towards those timelines.
You're making me think I should reevaluate our meeting structures at Wave. But awesome.
Well, I'm always happy to talk about that.
Thank you. I know you are. Thank you so much, both for working with me for 8 years and also for sharing your perspectives on this. I think it's really, really important for employers to understand the difference between laziness and lack of being seen, feeling validated, or connected to the work. I think that's our job, is to make sure that folks do feel connected to the work in a way that has a value prop for them. And so I am super grateful to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm super grateful for being here. And I also appreciate that you've dealt with 8 years of working with me and my Gen Z madness. So it goes both ways. But thank you so much for having me.
Amazing. Thank you all for tuning in to the Wavelength. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to leave us a review and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're actively looking to support your own mental well-being, please be sure to download the Wave Life app. It is the only digital solution designed from the ground up for digital natives, and anyone else can use it too. Our music is Gold Roses from Cloud System. Please join us next time as we continue to navigate all the highs and lows, all the waves of emotional well-being for digital natives on the Wavelength.